Welcome. Can you hear me back there? Good, good, good. Welcome to the Authors Hour. My name is Fred Zerm, and I have the privilege of representing the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We are a volunteer organization whose aim is to promote writers and writing at Chautauqua, and we hope beyond, by both supporting and supplementing the official activities of the institution's Writers Center. Let me tell you a little bit about our weekly activities. One of them is every Tuesday, Authors Hour. We have Chautauqua affiliated writers, Chautauquans, present their work. That's something that you need to apply for. So if you're a writer with a published book, you can go on our website that I'm going to mention multiple times, but chq.org/FCWC for Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center, and you may apply. On Sundays at 5 o'clock up on the second floor in the Pros Room, we have an open mic for writers and listeners if you just want to listen, 18 years old and older. On Fridays, we sponsor an informal critique. So if you have one page of writing, prose, or poetry that you can either make some copies of or we can quickly make some copies of, we usually advise 10 copies, then you can share them and there'll be feedback guided by a published writer. We're usually in the garden room, but because of the auction setup, this Friday will be in the ballroom. Those are our weekly activities. At halftime, I'll tell you about some of our special annual events. But let's get to the reason you came here, which was not to listen to me, but to listen to some gifted authors reading from their work. Our first is Lara Lillibridge. She's the author of the Truth About Unringing Phones, essays on Yearning. Also, Mama, Mama, Only Mama, and a Reverent Guide for the Newly Single Parents. And Girlish, Growing Up in a Lesbian Home. Lara is the interviews editor for Hippocampus magazine and creative nonfiction co-editor for Hartwood Literary magazine. She holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from West Virginia Wesleyan College, and she actually began her study of writing here at the Writers Center in 2008 in a workshop hosted, run by David Lazar. So she is homegrown. Okay. Lara.
Can you hear me okay in the back? Perfect. Thanks. So this book, The Truth About Unringing Phones, is made up of a bunch of very short essays and some sort of medium essays. So I'm going to read you a smattering of introduction. When I was 4 years old, my father moved from Rochester, New York to Anchorage, Alaska, a distance of over 4,000 miles. I spent my childhood chasing after him, flying a quarter of the way around the world, tug at the hem of his jacket, and beg him to look at me. As I aged, my adoration of my father and longing for him was layered over with anger, revulsion, and later pity, like a hand-dipped candle. These new emotions fusing with, but not replacing, the yearning which remains at my core. My father is in his 80s. Parkinson's has left him with an unstable gait. An old neck injury rendered his voice quiet and raspy. Dementia comes and goes and stays longer each time. My father is a lonely old man, and society says I should be a dutiful daughter. But the only way I've survived my father was to cut myself off from him, having only the most superficial interactions. This book is my attempt to weigh responsibility versus self-preservation. The first essay I'm going to read is called An Illustrative Example. I love the Anchorage airport. Glass cases held taxidermied animals, moose and a giant polar bear standing on its hind legs. Normally, I walked out of the jetway and Dad was right there. Sometimes Matt and I had to walk to the end of the terminal to find him, but the airport was small. When I was somewhere between 9 and 12, I flew to Alaska alone, which wasn't unusual. Our winter visits were often alone time with Dad. What was unusual was that Dad wasn't at the end of the jetway, nor in the main terminal, nor at baggage claim. It was okay, though. I knew the procedure. I stood at the conveyor belt, watching for my blue Samsonite suitcase. When I saw it, I pulled it off one-handed, then moved to a corner to wait for Dad, just like a grown-up. How much longer? How much longer? How much longer? I had looked at the calendar with longing for months and waited to see him again, and I counted every excruciatingly long hour on every excruciatingly long flight and every excruciatingly long layover. Watching the hour hand move me closer to Dad as the time zone moved me farther from my mother until she and I were 4 hours apart, and now Dad and I were minutes from each other. But minutes piled up and turned into hours, and still he did not come. All the passengers from my flight left, and then another flight worth of baggage circled on the conveyor belt, and still I waited. I couldn't see the polar bear or any of the animals, but I didn't wander off to look at them. I didn't read a book. I just perched on my battered and duct-taped suitcase and scanned the crowd for my father's beard and black sea captain's hat. How much longer? How much longer? How much longer? Eventually, an airport employee tapped me on the shoulder and wanted to know who I was waiting for. I gave her Dad's name, but I didn't know his office phone number or the name of his medical practice. But she was resourceful and knew someone who knew someone and was able to track him down after a few calls. He'd forgotten I was coming that day. I didn't understand because I had spoken to him the night before. We always called the night before to make sure everything was arranged, just like I had to practice calling Mom collect to make sure I knew how to do it in case of an emergency. Of course, this wasn't an emergency, so I hadn't called her. I was sure Dad would come. I didn't understand that he hadn't been counting the days, hours, or minutes between us. I didn't understand that my love for my father was like balancing my small body on the teeter-totter against his larger weight. I was always floating, leaning back, squirming to make something work on my own, when all I needed was for him to put one foot down, keep us in balance. A little bit longer chapter called The Boat Was Always the Best Part of My Father. Oh, let me just interject to say, my father lived in Anchorage, Alaska, but he kept a boat in Seward, and we would sail from Seward, Alaska to Cordova every summer so he could do medical clinics because Cordova was not connected by road to any main town at that point. Steam rose from Dad's damp wool jacket in the Alaskan summer morning. The air was no temperature, neither hot nor cold, the Arctic sun flashing on the snow patches that always remain from the mountain heat. His thick-knuckled, ropey-veined hands gripped the knob of the tiller as he steered the boat. Under the brim of a black captain's hat, his glacier blue eyes twinkled inside crow's feet. His lips, thin like mine, curled upwards beneath his neatly combed beard. His feet were steady on the gray wooden deck, his knees loose to take up the sway as he sailed the Ghost. Ghost he was to me, drifting in and out of my life, but most firmly anchored when bobbing on the currents of the jade-green water of Prince William Sound. The cry of seagulls, the acrid scent of sea lions, off in the distance orcas breached. Porpoises swam alongside, crisscrossing under the bow. Dad read us stories and poems and taught us to play the auto harp, and I danced on the bow as it rocked side to side, bending into as much of the choreography from ballet class as I could remember, making up what I didn't. Proud that my body blended with the rhythm of the waves, breathing of the earth. My feet never faltered. I never feared falling overboard. The sway was part of me, unnoticed as I danced or read or slept. The boat had a diesel motor, and almost every trip it needed some repair or at least some tweaking. The smell of exhaust, the clank of Dad's tools as we handed them down to him below deck. If I am now stuck behind an ambulance or an old bus, the fumes make me nostalgic. One person ran the throttle and we yelled back and forth until Dad was satisfied. It always sounded the same to me. Once, he couldn't fix whatever was wrong and we had no motor for the rest of the trip. We had to sail into harbor, something scary and tricky. And Matt and I leaped onto the pier and pulled the lines to stop the ghost from crashing into the dock. But there were fishermen there whose hands found the lines with ours and did the real work of it. The big flannel-clad men slapped our backs and told us how brave we were, even though they had been the ones to save us. I was never braver than when I was in Alaska under my father's gaze. Dad bought a bosun's chair and hauled us up the mast one by one. We pushed our bare feet against the halyards and flew back and forth from one side to the other, making the boat sway 10 feet below. If we were at harbor, Dad liked to pretend to leave us up there, getting the other child to jump onto the dock with him and walk away, not returning until the child tied up was streaking with tears. Blue sailbags were stowed on the bowsprit front of the boat, surrounded by a metal rail, and we sat on them, protruding over the ocean when we were under power, not sail. The wind whipped my hair back and out of my eyes, the salt air so familiar I didn't notice the scent of it unless there were sea lions nearby. We could smell them miles away, hear them too. I loved to watch them, but I didn't think they looked happy, mounded up on top of each other, crying and whooping all day. I loved the otters and seals, and when the porpoises danced under the bow just beyond my dangling feet, I felt special, chosen. Like maybe I was a little bit magic too, friends of the sea creatures. We sailed up to a glacier so Matt and I could watch it calve, which is when large chunks shear off and fall into the ocean. The glacier was a weird bright blue, but stuffed with silt and dirt. The passage to reach it was narrow and filled with floating ice. My brother and I had to lean over the bowsprit and look for icebergs that day. And if I'm honest, I was angry about it. I didn't think the view was worth the risk. It was the only time I remember doubting my father's judgment. But then the Titanic had been recently found and it was all over the news. Other things that should have scared me, like sailing where there were no boats and only an unreliable radio for communication, didn't bother me at all. Boat crashes and fathers having heart attacks and leaving their children adrift weren't things that made the news back then. And nothing bad ever happened on the boat anyway. It is only my perspective as a parent that makes me see the dark edge of potential doom at the edges of my childhood. At the end of the day, we'd row to shore and cook from the always rocky beaches. There was never any sand, but some rocks were smoother than others. The islands themselves were great rocks rising from the sea, covered in soft moss and small evergreen trees, and we ran alone through the woods, making our own stories. A depression in a rock filled with water, just a puddle really, became a fairy pool. Once we found surveyor stakes, and Dad yanked them out of the soil and replanted them in the middle of the creek. He said he didn't want anyone disrupting the wild beauty of Alaska. He said the islands belonged to all of us and shouldn't be bought or built on. If there was a stream wide enough to wash in, we did. Otherwise, there was no bath. Dad wasn't strict about brushing our hair or teeth. My hair thickened with tangles, and we always returned home with a few new cavities. Sailing was always only ours, Dad, Matt, and me. No wives, no step-siblings, and only once was my half-sister Julie, who was sure we were going to die. Dad said in 2 years we were going to do mail-away school and sail around the world. I told my friends back home, and they laughed, because they knew something I didn't, that it was always going to be in 2 years, never next year, and never right now. He clicked. The problem was he acted as if I delighted him, as if I were smart, fascinating, capable, and then he'd vanish again. And then he'd call me and tell me how delightful, smart, and capable his new stepchildren were, how happy he was to get a second chance at being a father, how he got to do all these things with them, these delightful new children, that he never did with me. I didn't know how to be delightful without him. Do you remember the way your cheek would sweat next to a hard telephone receiver? Do you remember all the little holes in the mouthpiece of a landline phone? How sometimes all the words you wanted to say floated away instead of falling into those little holes and racing across the telephone lines to your father's ears? The words, "I still need you," somehow couldn't escape my mouth, fit into those holes, travel to my father's eardrums all the way in Alaska. I won't let them bubble up inside me now. I am 47. It is time to move on. And the last one I will read is called The Blue Hour. In my freshman year in high school, I moved to Alaska for a year and went to school there. In winter, the Anchorage sun shines through the deep snow on the mountains, and the city is colored blue. Lattice shadows, azure snow, everything is drenched in tones of the night sky or the deepest ocean until the sun rises high enough for the light to reach us unfiltered, ordinary once more. That isn't actually the true scientific explanation for the bluing, but it was the one my father gave me as an invitation into the magic of Alaskan winter. Revising memory to conform with fact erodes the feeling of wonder. Let it be snow and sun and latitude. Let me hold the memory of the glimpse of my father's ice blue eyes and his smile-crinkled face as he showed me the otherworldliness peculiar to his hometown. That first hour feels like a blending of story and reality, a hint of places where magic could live. And as I watched, Moose, taller than a person, walked slowly down the silent street. The snow was so cold it squeaked beneath the twist of my boot heel. There was no wind in the valley, never wind in the valley, and the snow felt soft and dreamlike, unbuffeted, coming to rest on my aquanet shellac hair like glitter. "Don't touch it," my father said. "Just let it dry and your hair will be fine." And it was. But I was not fine in the land of forget-me-nots and fireweed, of never being warm enough in a sun that never set in the summer and only rose for a few hours in winter. When I had detention, I went to school in the dark and returned home in the dark. The blue hour, just a memory of when Anchorage was my vacation town, not my home. Instead, I looked out the window at snow-covered roads, topped with a layer of sand because it was too cold for salt to be effective. The sun was always more white than yellow, colder and less friendly than the one back home in New York. And yes, I saw the northern lights and more than once, but I didn't know that once I left Alaska, I'd be unable to see them the same way again. The lower latitude robbed the band for their color. When I tried to explain how they really looked, my words didn't sound real, even to my own ears. I mean to say that I didn't know to cherish them. Alaska was magic and untamed wildness, but also drugs and shoplifting and failing out of school. Anchorage's Bernard Road loomed like an alternate ending of my story, a place where in the 1980s, Native girls disappeared, only to be found dead with marks of torture on their young bodies. Girls I resembled with my long dark hair, though I wasn't Native. Alaska's winter was the place where I couldn't raise myself out of the shadows to be my better self, but I meant to. And one day I swore I'd come back after college and make myself and Alaska everything we were both capable of being, if only we had a bit more luck, and if only the blue hour lasted just a tiny bit longer. And of course I never went back, despite my promise to the city. It was too far and too cold. It was, in the end, not my home, though it cradled me 9 months. At the end, I left it behind to live in the real world, meaning the lower 48. The only other place that called to me in the same way as Alaska was Key West, the diagonal opposite of the country. And though I loved that place too, it was always as a stepchild, a slight distance between me and the people born there. notwithstanding the history I was building. I was born in the middle of the country, and that's where I fit, where life will always feel real to me, even though it has no magic and no hour of blue, but only overcast skies. The edges were someplace I tried on and longed to keep, but somehow the cost was always too high. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Wonderfully evocative details. I will never think of sea lions or diesel smoke quite the same again. Let me just say a few things about this special event. The Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center sponsors, and then we'll get our sponsors, and we'll get to our second reader. First of all, this Sunday, July 14th, Bastille Day, also my grandson's birthday, we'll have the annual Authors Anonymous Book Fair on Vester Plaza between 12 and 2. But once, okay. So that's a chance to see many local authors and look at what they've written and perhaps buy, think at a time. The annual writing contests for writers of all ages are open. Online submissions, once again, that webpage that I'll mention several times, chq.org/fcwc. If you scroll down, up until July 28th, you can submit your work, prose or poetry. The award ceremony will be on August 11th. That's a Sunday at 2:30 in the Hall of Philosophy. On August 5th in the Hall of Philosophy, the Friends will be holding the annual Robert Pinsky Favorite Poem Project, something that Robert Pinsky established when he was poet laureate and kicked off, not for the first time in the country, but he was part of the initial Favorite Poem Project here. We're approaching year 25, I think. That's a time where selected Chautauquans can read a poem that's their favorite poem or one of their favorite poems and briefly explain why the poem means so much to them. Once again, chq.org/fcwc. I did want to say a word about what's out on the lawn there. And I'm going to just read something I've been given about it. Recoloring the past, reclaiming the present, and charting a course for the future, art has the ability to change the way we see the world and relate with our community. Bringing authentic artworks by leading contemporary artists from West Africa, Shura Lagos Gallery, in partnership with Kwame Alexander, Director of Literary Arts, and the Chautauqua Institution, offers a healing vision for all via Free Throw, an exhibition of works from the Crossover series. So after the readings, after you've had a chance to buy some books, please enjoy the art book. Our next reader, Sabeeha Rehman, an author, blogger, and speaker on the American Muslim experience, is best known for Threading My Prayer Rug, one woman's journey from Pakistani Muslim to American Muslim. For an irresistibly charming 2015 account of growing up in Pakistan. I will say best for that. Okay. Shortlisted for the 2018 William Saroyan International Prize for Writing, it also won Book List and San Francisco Book Festival honors, and was listed among top memoirs by Reader's Digest. Excerpts from her memoir were featured in the Wall Street Journal and Salon.com. She has co-authored with Walter Ruby her second book, We Refuse to Be Enemies, How Muslims and Jews Can Make Peace. I'm having a hard time reading today. Can make peace one friendship at a time. And you've been appearing with Walter, talking about that book on the grounds here. She has given over 250 talks in nearly 100 cities at houses of worship, academic institutions, libraries, and community organizations, including Chautauqua Institution. Sabeeha has given talks on the art of memoir writing at academic institutions, including Hunter College, New York. She is an op-ed contributor to the Houses of Worship column of the Wall Street Journal. Her writings have been published in Newsweek, New York Daily News, Forward, the Baltimore Sun, Washington Jewish Week, Tiferet, and Atheos.com. Her third book that she'll be reading from today is It's Not What You Think, an American in Saudi Arabia, and that was published in October 2022. Sabeeha.
Thank you, Fred, for that invitation and for the introduction. And Lara, that was beautiful. Sad and beautiful. I can see now the title of the book and what it means. Thank you all for coming. I had been living in the United States for over 30 years when I picked up my bag and moved to Saudi Arabia. Can you hear me at the back? Now, why would someone who has made a life and a career and a home for herself in New York City, her children on their way to starting lives of their own, just pack up and leave? One day, my husband was reading his medical journal and he looks up and says to me, so there is this hospital in Saudi Arabia that is looking for an oncologist. And my response was, so? I think I'm going to apply. All right, you can apply. So he goes ahead and applies. And then a week later, he says, they've sent me an email and they want me to come for a 1-week locum tenens to try it out. So I think I'm going to go. And I said, sure. He'll go. He'll see it for himself. He will know that this place is not for us. And that will be that. Boy, was I wrong. A week later, he writes to me and says, they want you to come. And they're willing to offer you a job. So they're paying for your airfare to come and take a look at it for a week. I said, okay, so now when I go there, I'll see the facts on the ground and I will be able to convince him that this place is not for us. I ended up staying for 6 years in Saudi Arabia. So what changed my mind? We don't have time to get into it, but it's all in the book. As I was leaving, one of my book club friends said to me, Sabeeha, when you get there, why don't you start emailing us every day of your experiences so that we can learn with you? Because first impressions can never be recaptured. So do it in real time. And I thought that was a great idea. So as soon as I got there, I started sending emails home every day. Day 1 in Saudi Arabia, day 2 in Saudi Arabia. And I discovered that I enjoyed writing. And that diary became the first section of my book. Saudi Arabia was not what I thought. First of all, I had to wear an abaya, which is a black cloak. And every time you step out of the compound in public, you had to wear the black cloak. Once you get past the idea that this is being imposed on you, you actually find it liberating. I no longer had to worry about what am I going to wear. I'm in my sweats, just throw that abaya over you, bad hair day, no worries, wrap your head in a scarf and you're all set to go. Then there was the interesting issue of rural versus urban. So here in the United States, in the rural communities, you find more conservatism. In the urban communities, people are more progressive. In Saudi Arabia, it was the opposite. So there was the city culture versus the desert culture. In the city, you had to wear the abaya. But if you are out in the desert, camping or doing whatever, no one wore the abaya. In the city, women were forbidden from driving. You could not drive a car. In the rural areas, in the hill cities, in the desert, women were driving, men and women were driving four-wheelers. In the city, a woman could not work in a public place, like being a cashier or being a bank teller. In the rural areas, they were women-owned businesses in these touristy areas with the choice spots for them to display their wares, and they had young Saudi men reporting to them, and they're yelling at them, "Yalla, go get this woman her scarf, go get this woman her hat." And I was like, wow. Then there were the contradictions. So I'm in a compound where all the expats are living, and by the swimming pool, you have women lounging in the bikinis, and that was okay. But once you stepped out, then you had to cover yourself. And that was an attempt by the Saudi authorities to make the expats comfortable, make them feel at home. So in the walls of the compound, anything and everything goes. Once you step out, you have to respect the culture of the land. I started noticing that under the abaya was a very stylish woman. And how did I know that? Because in the shopping mall, they were taking clothes off the rack that even I would not dare wear, like plunging necklines and skinny skirts. And it was so contradictory to my image of a woman in the abaya all covered up. Then there was the segregation in the home. So every house had two entrances, one for the men, one for the women. Two separate living rooms, one for the men, one for the women. But the dining room was combined, so they had sliding doors. You close the doors of the men's area, you open the doors of the women's area, you come get your food, you close the door, open the door, the men come, you get the picture, right? Worked for them. But what was interesting is that whereas a woman could not drive a car, she could hail a cab and sit in the back seat of the cab and go anywhere, and that was considered okay, but it was not considered for her to be behind the driver's seat. So it was interesting to see how they were balancing modernity with practicality. Because a mom has to take the child to school, has to hail a cab because she cannot drive. So it's okay to be with a stranger, the cab driver in a car, because that was the necessity of the moment. It was not what I thought. I got a job in the hospital working for the Quality Resource Management Department, where I would be overseeing the work of physicians. I'm not a clinician, but from a quality perspective. After I filled out my form in the Human Resources Department, she, a Saudi woman in a hijab, pushed a form to me and said, "Can you please have your husband sign it?" And I said, "Why does my husband have to sign my job forms? Because you need his permission to work here." Right? "Honey," I paged my husband the day of pagers, "can you please come over and sign up permission for me to work?" And he says, "And what's in it for me?" My boss said to me on my first day, a Saudi man, "Act American. Everybody over here respects Americans." I didn't know what he meant, act American. He said, "Don't try to push your Muslimness. That's not going to get you anywhere. Stick to the image of an American." And what I realized he meant was be assertive, speak up. And he said, "You have 6 months to establish yourself, and you'll do that by speaking up at meetings." So I started speaking up at meetings, and I realized all these Saudi men sitting around the conference table, my voice was heard. I was given the respect that I believe I deserved. Then there's the issue of the veil. So I go on a orientation meeting the heads of different departments, and I go to the finance department, and the head of the finance department is a Saudi woman wearing a veil. All I could see were her eyes. I said, "Oh my goodness, that's not what I thought." So I'm talking to her, and she says to me, "So what is the objective of your meeting, Sabeeha?" My objective, yes, I think I can come up with an objective. So I crack a joke, and now I don't know if she's smiling or frowning. And the next day I'm walking the hallway, and there's a woman walking towards me from the opposite direction, and she says, "Hi, Sabeeha." And I say, "Hi." "Oh, Laura, you didn't recognize me?" Oh, I didn't recognize you. You have a veil on your face. But they have figured it out. They can recognize one another. And eventually, I got the hang of it. But what struck me was the women in powerful places in this hospital. Physicians, yes, of course, but also administrative heads of departments in IT, in finance, and ward clerks. And interestingly, never a Me Too moment that I know of. I was practically the HR person down the road of my division, and nothing ever hit my screen, nothing ever hit my phone or my desk. And here was a situation where expat women, American, Canadian, Australian, South African, nurses. And it was an opportunity for the Saudi men, thinking that they can be more familiar with them. I never heard anything to them. What is interesting is not what I thought, that there was reverse discrimination. So if you walk into a shopping mall after 8 p.m., a single man, with the prime time, they are nocturnal, a single man cannot enter a shopping mall unless he is accompanied by a female escort, his mother or his sister, because they don't want them to be harassing the women. In the shopping mall, there was a woman's only floor, and if you had to board a plane, a flight, the first to board were women. Like over here, it's the disabled and it's the veteran. Over there, it's the woman. So if you want to board first, get a woman as your partner. Very family-oriented place. It wasn't what I thought. The culture shock was more than, me dealing with the image of women. It was the Arabic language. So the Saudi men in the hospital spoke fluent English, but with an Arabic slang. So what is, I'll read it. I knew even before coming to Saudi that Arabic alphabet does not have the equivalent of the letter P. Over time, I learned that it also doesn't have the letter V, nor does it have the ch sound, as in change or chewing gum. I was chatting with Abir, my Lebanese colleague, when she said to me, "Would you like to share a meeting?" What would you like to share in which meeting? It's the quality indicators meeting. We need a share. What do you want me to share? And we're going back and forth, and then she says, "No," she says, "just the meeting. You have to share it." And then it struck me, "Oh, you want me to chair the meeting?" Yes, that's what I said. Chair. Chair. Another time I was in a meeting. I was not chairing this meeting. Sorry, I didn't mean to make light of it. God only knows what an utter disaster I would be if I tried to converse in Arabic. My ha and my ayn pronunciations are hopeless. Anyhow, the meeting. It had to do with medical errors. A wrong reading of an X-ray film leading to a misdiagnosis, but caught on time. And now we were trying to figure out what went wrong and how to prevent it from recurring. Saudi doctors and technicians sat around the table with IT men and women. A radiologist was presenting the issue. "You see, every time I put my film in the viewer," and he went on to make his point. "Excuse me," I leaned forward, cupping my hand behind my ear. "Could you please repeat that?" He turned towards me. "When I put the film in the viewer," I'm sorry, "where do you put the film?" "In the viewer." He raised his hands up to his eye level and made a square to view the film. I should have kept my mouth shut instead of exclaiming, "Oh, you mean the viewer." Now I've embarrassed him. "Yes, the viewer," he said, not missing a beat, and continued. Now, I can conjure up many jokes, as in vocal or focal, that or fat, feel or feel, but that wouldn't be nice. We all know the quirks of the English language, particularly the spellings that make no sense, as in NO no and KNOW no, TOO2, TWO2, and CO2, snuff and enough,
But I can't resist this one last one. My father would tell this story of a long time ago when he lived in England. It was in the 1950s. One day, he and his friends were driving through town, and on reaching their destination, started looking for a place to park. Finding an empty spot, they pulled over. Not sure if this was a legal parking spot, one of his friends, an Arab, rolled down the window, the days when you could roll down the window. Anyhow, he leaned out and asked the policeman standing by, "Officer, can we park here?" "Sir, you can park here, but you cannot park here." I didn't make this up. That was fun. Another culture shock. The work week was Saturday through Wednesday. Sunday was a working day. Thursday and Friday was the weekend. When I would say to someone, "See you tomorrow," they'd say, "It's Thursday." No office hours. Now, doing business in the United States we were only left with Monday, Tuesday, not even Wednesday, because that was, thank God, it's Friday. Then it was the British system versus the matrix system. I go to the supermarket to buy five, and I say, "May I have a pound of turkey breast, please?" And he says, "How many kilos, man?" And now I'm converting 2.2 kilos to a pound, or 2.2 pounds to a kilo, and I end up walking home with twice as much turkey as I needed. My recipes were in pounds and ounces. My carrot cake ended up floating in oil, rock hard. Then there was Fahrenheit versus centigrade. 40 degrees here meant bundle up and stay inside. 40 degrees there meant unbundle and stay inside. Then there was the order of dates. Date, month, year was in Pakistan. Month, day, year was in the US. I go back and it's date, and month, year. I make an appointment for July 6th. I show up a month early, June 7th, 7+6 versus 6+7. Culture shock. Then there was the military time versus standard time. To make calendar appointments, you had to do it in hours, 1400 hours. Okay, so 1400 hours, 2 p.m. Then there was the Gregorian calendar versus the Hijra calendar, which is the Muslim calendar. Everything was in the Hijra calendar with the fine print of the Gregorian calendar below. So 2001 was 1422. The calendars were printed in both. So here's what happens to me when I go to book my seat with a travel agent to go back to the United States. Just when I thought I had it figured out, I was at the travel agent making vacation plans for November, and he placed a calendar in front of me and asked me to identify the Hijra dates. Now, if I'm leaving for New York on Wednesday, November 7th, try figuring this out. I have to put my leave request in Hijra, inform my family of my arrival dates in Gregorian, take a flight in Hijra at the military time of 10:20 hours, and land in New York on the Gregorian date and non-military time. So a 16-hour flight going west, minus the 8-hour time difference, with no daylight saving time in effect, figure this out for me, please. On what date and time do I arrive in New York? I have to let my children know to come pick me up. And ask the airlines, they always make mistakes. The last time I relied on the airline's itinerary, we arrived in Malaysia a day early. We had flown from New York. Imagine our surprise when the hotel in Kuala Lumpur informed us that we did not have reservations for that day. But we do. Here's the confirmation receipt. It says Friday. Man, today is Thursday. I was there when 9/11 happened in Saudi Arabia. I was performing the pilgrimage in Mecca, the Umrah small pilgrimage. I had been there only 5 months, and everything changed. What was it like for me personally and professionally? Well, personally, like everybody else, it was a horror. I had to go get counseling. Professionally, in that setting, People, the Saudi people were stopping us minute after minute and saying, are you okay? Is your family okay? Is there anything we can do to help? And then they put out a bulletin saying, if you want to break your contract and leave, no penalty. Your severance will be paid to you. If you have an earned vacation and want to go for a while, please go. You will get paid time off. If you need counseling, we have psychologists based over here. Internet time was limited. They opened it up for 24 hours. Very, very concerned about our well-being. At a societal level, the public pronouncement on part of the authorities was that Osama bin Laden wanted to bring down the royal family. He could have recruited his hijackers from anywhere in the world, but he picked Saudi people because he wanted to put a Saudi face to it. And we deplore what happened and what was done. A few months later, I performed the Hajj, and the details of that are in my book, which I don't have time to take care of, to discuss. King Fahad died in the hospital, and I kind of got involved in that and talk about that. Fred, how much time do I have?
2 minutes, roughly.
Okay, but I will close by talking about the veil. Saudi women will fight to demand that they be allowed to veil their faces. And I encountered that when I was preparing for the Hajj and was in a classroom, and when the teacher said, you cannot you cannot veil your faces when you're performing the Hajj, they stood up and started protesting. I cannot do that. I have to veil my face. You can't tell me that I cannot veil my face. And I was like shocked. I had been under the impression that this had been imposed on them. Well, it has been, but it became part of their life, and then that's what they embraced. But here's a sad side to it. I was in a meeting with a colleague, and I noticed that he was looking sad. Is everything okay? I knew him well enough to ask the personal question. My brother is sick. He's dying. Oh, I'm so sorry. Why don't you take a few days off and spend some time by his bedside? I had decided not to go. Why? Out of consideration for my sister-in-law. You see, he paused. I have never seen her face. My eyes widened, and then I understood. He explained that his sister-in-law is spending every minute and day with her husband, and for him to go into his husband's room means that she will have to leave the room, and he didn't want to deprive her of her time with her husband. I came to my office and cried. Tears of compassion for my colleague, his sacrifice, and tears of frustration at the veil that separates brother from dying brother. 2 days later, when I watched him sob at the death of his brother, I wept over the precious moments he gave up to respect the boundaries of the veil. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the, it definitely was not what I thought Saudi Arabia might be. And I couldn't help but thinking, well, we kind of experienced our own sale during the nasty. I was directing flights at the time, but rehearsals were masked, so you couldn't tell what facial expression the actors were using. Thankfully, when we unmasked for performances, the facial expressions were appropriate. We have a little time for Q&A. If you have any questions for either or both of the authors, that would be great. Just raise your hand if you have something you'd like to ask. Especially, I know Sabeeha didn't get to do something that maybe you're curious about. Any questions? My question is, why do they schedule all the heavy equipment moving during author's hour? I guess it's a busy time. Let me mention just upcoming events. One is on Thursday at 3:30 in the Hall of Philosophy. Dan Keegan, the author of The Devil's Element, Oxford, will be speaking about that one. On Fridays, the new rhythm here is that on Fridays, several people, usually 4 or so from the 2 workshops being taught, the prose and poetry workshop will read from their work, and the teachers will also have some brief words to say. In terms of our sister art, drama, Birthday Candles has opened a very good play that was developed at Chautauqua back in 2017, went to Detroit and the Detroit Public Theater, and then went to Roundabout Theater and Broadway in New York. I suggest you see it. I know I'm saying it tomorrow at 4. Next week, we'll have 2 poets. Craig Syke will be reading from his newest book, Here It Comes, and It's Gone. Someone named Fred Zerm will be reading from his poetry chapbook, Object Lessons from 2021, and Rescue Dogs, just released this month, which I think is kind of appropriate for a book named Rescue Dogs. They would release the book, okay? Let's get Sabeeha and Lara our final round of applause. And I hope to see you next week at the Author Tower. Thank you.
Do you have a list of the books that
If you want to.